everybody, greetings. There's still some people to come, but we're going to start now because we've got lots to fit in, and you know, it's just that. So just welcome. For those of you, anybody who doesn't know me.
Yeah, who are you again?
I'm Lorna Hamilton-Brown. I'm an artist, local, and I devised the show and created the show. So I came to Hastings Contemporary and we had this conversation, basically, that I didn't feel that it represented the town in terms of local artists or black artists. And then we've been on this journey to make this show happen. And they've made space in their programme. We had to raise our own money to do it. They've supported us in different ways, but it has been a journey. So, and we're here now, we're really happy. And so we've just, what are we going to do, say your names as we go along?
Richard Rawlins.
Elaine Mullings.
Eugene Palmer.
Maggie Scott.
Right, so, you know, why did I choose this motley crew? Well,
We chose you.
when I had the idea for the show, I was thinking, who will I work with? And really, I had a big pool of artists I could work with. But I wanted artists that work in a similar way to myself. So my work, my medium, my main medium is knit. I do a lot of research. So it's based in a lot of research, a lot of detail, a lot of repetition. So I wanted artists that worked in the same way. So Richard and I were at the Royal College of Art at the same time, 2016, 2018. So I did my master's at 60. Yeah, I know you're shocked, but anyway. Elaine, I knew when I first moved here. I've been here about nearly 17 years, and I went to a talk. There's a place called the Arts Forum, and I went for a talk there, and I walked in and I went like that because I was so shocked to see a black artist speaking in Hastings, and then we've been friends ever since. But, as they say in Leicester, when I spoke to Elaine, every year, I've given up art now. I don't do art anymore, and we've been having that conversation for 4 years, wasn't it? 4 years, right? But I managed to persuade her to come back. And if you've been into the gallery, you see, like, if you just see blue, you know Elaine. So I'm so glad that she's back. So with Eugene Palmer, I hadn't heard of him. You've been here about 15 years, isn't it? Yeah. So we've been here. Never seen him, didn't know him. And then Richard said, you need to get, and I was like, I don't even know him. Then when I saw his paintings, I was blown away, so he had to be in. Maggie, I knew of Maggie's work, textiles, so she's got the lenticulars within the gallery. And you could just walk past that and not realise that it's textiles. So shame on you, walk past and not known about that. And then Paul, we met in the library, didn't we? We went to a talk at the library, and he was telling me that he worked in leather, and because I work in knit.
This is the first time that's happened.
We met in the library.
You see what I have to work with? You see what I have to work with? So he's a leather worker, and because I work with knit, I wanted a strong craft element to the show. So we've got knit, we've got leather work, we've got textiles, and we've got Elaine using tissue, so that was the mixture. So how this session's going to work is each artist is going to speak for 5 minutes. This is a 3-minute timer, so when it runs out, they know they've got to wrap up, so we will stay on time. And it's in 2 sections. So the first section is this idea of looking back to look forward. So what did they do as a child? Were their artistic efforts noticed as a child? Were they encouraged? If not, why not? So that's going to be the first section. And then we're going to have a comfort break of 15 minutes. And then the second part will be looking at the themes of in each artist's work and how that impacts what they do. So if you've been on a tour, one of our tours, you won't be disappointed because you're not going to get what you get on the tour. Okay? So we'll start here. So we might as well start with you, Richard, because you're the nearest. And just, you know, were you encouraged as a child in your artistic practice? Just talk a bit about that and how your early years has impacted how you work now. Great.
Thanks, Chris. I don't think I need all that time, but yeah, I've always been encouraged by my family to create work and make work. My father was an artist, not a professional one. He made elaborate models and stuff like that. I think if you go to the Electric Palace to see the program we have, I think the little short on him that Marielle, my wife, made is from a show before. the main feature. So that's a little bonus. But he always made things, and he drew and he painted and stuff like that. And I had this huge scrapbook, and he would draw something and I would draw the same thing, and he would draw something else and I would draw that. And it was always encouraged, and straight through school I kept with it. And like a lot of kids at that period, I really learned to draw between my dad and from reading a lot of comics. So that if you see my work, you'll see a lot of comic references. All of my work have comic references, because basically I learned to draw from looking at American comic book artists and stuff like that, and some European artists as well too. But that's been the journey in a sense for me. And then later on, fast forwarding through high school, where I continued to do art and everything, I went into advertising, because I'm also trained as a graphic designer, and I'm in love with print and everything about it, all its flaws, all the offset and all those things. And at age 40, I really committed myself. I'm 56 now, okay, just in case you're wondering. But at age 40, I really committed myself to a career as an artist. I still work as a graphic designer. The two worlds mix and match for me. And I guess when you look at my work, you can see elements of graphic design in it, and the way I approach making work and planning work and doing the things that I do. And yeah, I think that's the.
You were saying
that's
about further on, why did you do the MA?
Because, so I lived on an island, and the thing about the island is
Which one?
Well, try that. And an island really is a small place. If you live in the Caribbean and you're practicing as a contemporary artist in the Caribbean, you meet like-minded people throughout the Caribbean, and then you have correspondence with them and everything. But basically, for me, it was about expanding my networks, because it got to a point where I felt like I was doing the same thing over and over. I was swimming laps in the same pool, and I felt like I needed to challenge myself and do something different. And a friend of my wife said, well, if Richard is so bored here, why doesn't he go to RCA and do his master's? I was like, here, like, I want to get into RCA and all that kind of thing. She goes, if you know my wife, she goes, well, let's just do the first thing, right? Is apply to RCA, and then when you get it, we'll decide on what's next, right? So I said, well, I have nothing to lose, I'm not going to get into RCA anyway. So I applied to RCA, and lo and behold, I was accepted to RCA. And I always remember the day it happened too, because I was all set to enjoy Carnival, and then I got this email on Carnival Friday saying that Carnival Monday, RCA wants to meet me online for my student admissions, interviews, thing. And so out went Carnival that year for me, and that's all I focused on for the entire weekend. And the rest in a sense was history. I was a little worried about going back to school at age 50, but I discovered that it's a pretty cool thing when you go to school with an older mind, because you have this whole depth of knowledge, plus you have a mind that's just held on to a lot of stuff, and you don't have to really figure yourself out while you're actually trying to do school, in a sense. So it was a lovely experience. It gave me a lot of big boy toys to play with in terms of the equipment that they had there at RCA, and I met some interesting people, that I still know today, and in just creating new networks and everything. I'm sure the time is.
I know, well, I know 2 minutes, I'm
Okay,
watching
so-
it, yeah. Elaine?
No. Right. Okay, well, my journey is, I'm 68 now. Well, I'm doing 68 next birthday, so I've had several careers in the time. When I was at school, when I was very little, only my next door neighbour recognised my artistic qualities, and he used to pay me 50 pence to draw animals.
I didn't know this.
No, it wasn't 50, it was 5 bob then. So
A lot of money.
yeah, a lot of money. But you give me half a crown, and then if I did enough, I'd get another half a crown, so it was worth it. It was a good enterprise. And I kept drawing these things very quickly. So that was it, and that was it really. There was no sort of other recognition until I got to secondary school, and then I really started to blossom in the art class. But the tutor and I didn't get on, and he threw me out. And yeah, so I found so he threw me out, and then in the maths class, he threw me out, couldn't get on there. So I ended up back in the art centre. It was a really circuitous route, making art, but always being sort of sidelined. So I didn't do it for years. I mean, I've always made stuff, always been quite creative. And then I did all the usual stuff as a teenager, I had a good time. And then it was only in my sort of mid to late 20s I decided to go back to college. I'd had a protracted teenage, went back to college, got my A-levels, and then went on to university up in Lancaster. So away from London, because that's where I was born and grew up. And so that was interesting, going north. It was great, actually, meeting new people from all over. But I went to do politics and Italian, so nothing to do with art. Yeah, so the humanities. But that was it, that was interesting, because people always say, well, you're a bit arty. And I never really understood what that meant. And even when I was at the college, before I went to university, I would decorate my room with cards, and they said, you're a bit arty. And I always wondered if it was a compliment, or whether it was... Yeah, what do you mean by that? And even when I got my job, I used to work in broadcast and in the Leeds. And even there in my office, which was open plan, you used to fight for the window space to get the light, and even on my window space there were grey windows, so I covered them in postcards of all the travel that I did, and it was fabulous because you'd have palm trees or wherever it is I'd been, and they'd come in and go, oh, you're a bit arty. So this theme just kept going on. So I was there for about 14 years, and then I took redundancy, and I said, right, as I'm a bit arty, I'll go to art college. And so that's what I did. So I went back to art college just before I was 50. Yeah, around 50. I was 50. And yeah, so that was it. So I started off in ceramics. Didn't really get on with that, so I moved into drawing, which was okay, but my real love was sculpture. And so I did a couple of electives in sculpture, and I realised that's what I wanted to be. And my tutor in sculpture really encouraged me to go and do my MA. So I went straight to the Slade from Camberwell, which was great, interesting. So I studied for 6 years straight art. I was immersed in the art world, and it was fantastic. And like Richard, I had that wonderful opportunity to play with the toys. I learned printing, I learned to make big sculpture, and I learned welding. I learned all the skills that were sort of missing in my life before then. And I just loved it. I thought, wow, I mean, why didn't I do this before? This is, you could play all day and nobody told you off, and nobody threw you out. So it was a fantastic time. I mean, it had its ups and downs. And then finally, I graduated in 2011, and out into the big bad world. Yeah, and that was good. I made some friends, good friends from around the world, and I enjoyed the whole process of making work for exhibitions and going out to show my work, show my stuff. You didn't get that, Richard.
So Eugene, you've got a statement that you'd like to read.
No, my statement's the second one.
Oh, the second
because,
one.
it's
Okay, are you ready? Are you ready then?
Yeah, I'll just do the anecdotal bit. Yeah. There are some similarities actually with Elaine's early years, except that I was born in Jamaica. I came to England when I was 10. Between 5 and 10, my parents were in England, and I lived with my aunt, my sister and brother in Jamaica. Those 5 years, between 5 and 10, were sort of quite interesting. Anyway, an anecdote. And this is the bit that's similar to Elaine's. And it's about sort of awakening to this idea of being particularly good at something. And I remember at school, there was lots of talk all the time at lunch breaks, at lunchtime. For some reason, there was this conversation all the time about being good at drawing, and in particular being good at drawing cowboys. And the class above my class, they said they had the best cowboy drawer in their class. And my class, I was quite a shy boy. The students in my class said, "No, we have the best cowboy drawer," and I was that person. And so one lunchtime, it was actually set up. The other boy was drawing his cowboys here, and I was sitting drawing my cowboys here. And so it was my peers
who decided, because I came out as being the best drawer. So my peers told me really that there was something special. So I became aware of kind of being celebrated, if you like, for doing something well. Fast forward, between, I was then from 10 onwards. I was in England and go to junior school first. I think it was a year at junior school. And the next story took place there because I was completely confused at that year in junior school. So the year before doing your 11 plus, whereas in Jamaica I was a really able child. But during that year, the only thing that I actually got a sort of merit or some compliments about from the teacher came in the art class, because whatever, I'd done one particular piece of artwork which they thought great, and that went on the wall. So there was that second kind of affirmation, if you like, of that skill. And then I'll quickly say that, so in secondary school, everything went really well. I was able, very confident in all the, by then I'd sort of become kind of aware again. And I remember a metalwork teacher, not the art teacher, funnily enough, who was, he, unlike the other metalwork teachers, he was a supply teacher, and he was a jeweller. And he took the whole, so metalwork was completely transformed. We had to design our objects, we had to, they showed us how to make, give sort of special effects to surfaces and so on. But the main thing he did was he took the metalwork group to Aston University, to the art and design department, and that was it. Like you, all the students had a space, all their work, they were there, they could play all day, and I thought, and something clicked about what, by now, this would be just before doing O-levels, and so, as I said, something clicked, and I think that's probably where I made the decision I'd be going in the direction I'm going. So, yeah. I think it's over.
That's good. Thank you.
Finding out all these details.
I know, things we've never heard before. Yeah, okay.
Oh no, yeah. Okay, so 3-minute précis. So I was born in London from Caribbean parents, and it was an immigrant experience. So my mother had no education, my father had some education, and very much a working class background with other black children living in Notting Hill, where we were all in the same boat. So the idea of either further education was just completely, you just needed to get a job. So my journey is really it's about strangers. It's the, people coming up and suggesting things. So when I was about 10, we moved out of London, which was a huge shock, from a black community, a mixed community, blacks and Irish, that's where we were, and all poured together. And suddenly moving into the countryside and being the only black face everywhere. So my experience has been that. But it's a stranger, it's a neighbour knocked on my mother's door and said, your daughter likes sewing, so there is this Saturday morning class she could do. And I did. I loved stitching. That was my way through. I had a group called Volume 6. We were a go-go group. This is 13 in the UK. And I used to make all the costumes, because it was mini skirts, it was really easy. Make all the costumes. We would do the stuff in my sitting room. That was my background. And really, the generosity of this person said, look, there's this class, Farnham Arts School, you can go Saturday mornings. And it changed my life. I went to an institution, and suddenly discovered this whole world of art. And I also met on the way, so perhaps that's where the activism comes in. There was those of you who are a little older here will know about Oz, which was an alternative. And my best friend at these Saturday morning classes was what was called Jailbait of the Month, and she was the one they went to court. There's a whole story. But there was this alternative world that was happening, and I had no idea about. So the kindness of strangers got me there, and then when I was on that, I heard that there was foundation courses of structure. I then went on to do a foundation. When I was 16, the careers officer. Just to context, to say we're the same age. I'm 68. This was a time when, I could be a singer or an athlete or a nurse. Those are my options. And I was a rather good athlete actually at the time. So the careers officer, I always remember saying, well, you live in Hampshire, so you could go here. And that's where I went. I went to Maidenhead School of Art. It was like a finishing school. It was really, I had no idea. But there, the kindness of strangers, there was a tutor that also worked at St Martin's School of Art. And she led me, she helped me to make a portfolio. I went and did a foundation at Farnham again. And then they helped me to get a portfolio, and I got into St Martin's, which was at the time a big deal. And luckily, because I didn't come from that kind of family, I had no idea it was a big deal. It was like, oh, okay then, I'll do that. And it was also a time that you got a full grant. This was very, very different. So I got to meet with, how was my time? I got to meet with very different people. It's not quite the same now, but my group were from all over the world, and they were different classes. I felt quite at home with other working class people. And from there, it was a history of knitwear designer. And then 10 or 12 years ago, a bursary doing a one-woman show, moving from clothing to the wall. And that's, kind of my trajectory. But it's the kindness of strangers that got me here. Yeah, that's my time. Are you ready?
Oh, most certainly. I had the benefit of hearing everyone else speak, so I packed together. So for me, my dad came from Guyana, born in 1923, came here in the 50s, met my mum here, and he was all into engineering, and she was all into knitting. So this is a jumper that she knitted. And every time I wear it, so she was precise, he was precise, so I would use phrases like the datum line and top dead centre. He came to this country and couldn't get a job in engineering, so he ended up doing other jobs. And I was all good at sport, but he didn't like that because he could see that was stereotypical. He wanted me to do something else. And he had a workshop in the back with the electricity, and everything was touching something else, and you'd get an electric shock, but I always went there to make things. And when I went to school, Tulse Hill School, South London, I was sort of adopted really then by the art teacher, Dave Forster, and he has been a friend ever since, and came to the opening here, and guided me really in everything I've ever wanted to do, and art. So my dad wasn't into that. He wanted me to do something that would be really, academic. I was really wanting to be artist. So I did my A-levels, and he wanted me to not go to art school, and I wanted to go to art school, and there was a lot of friction. And I'd make pottery, and he might smash the occasional thing. But I realised that obviously art mattered because it provoked that in him. And years later, my friend, he sort of guided me. And when I got a sort of a book from his wife, I looked at it, and she was now a teacher at Leicester University. And so she said, well, would you want to do a master's in museum studies, which I did. And then my then wife was business manager at Capel Manor Horticultural College. And the course wasn't going to run for salary unless an extra person did it. So I did that. And my dad had always been good at everything, art, craft-wise, and he'd done stitching, repairing my shoes. So I went to the cordwainers, did that, and kind of just realised that that was what I liked doing, making things, and I always have. So then I left the cordwainers and then went to the CAS and did upholstery, but always just making things, never knowing where I wanted to go. And really, it's been the salvation for everything that I've ever done. Art, if I've ever got a problem, I wake up and art is the way out. So for me, it's just a central part of life. I just know that it's where I go. And it's, clearly I hadn't realised, but just remembering it's quite emotional. Sorry.
Go ahead. Ready?
Okay, so I'll stick to my time. It's nice hearing all these lovely stories. So my story is a bit different. So I was always quite creative. I just remember spending lots of time. My mum and dad used to argue all the time. I remember spending lots of time in the bedroom making things. Just occupying yourself. It's that kind of thing, occupying yourself and stuff like that. And back then I didn't know I was dyslexic, but I was dyslexic. I was always struggling at school, like Elaine, you just get excluded from classes and things like that. I remember that, I don't even know if this is dyslexic because they said, how do you spell film? But my mum always said flim. So I spelled flim. And it was just like, I went from an A grade, just to everything was the bottom class and with all disruptive children, stuff like that. And I really loved playing the violin, so music was my thing, and the teacher said, if this child does anything, this child must do music. So that's interesting. But so I wasn't really getting on at school. I had a nice teacher, Mrs. Jeffries, at Ennisdale School in Lee, who really encouraged me to do art, and that was at primary school. And it was I just think I had a lot of trauma. And I remember once was at school and we had to make a butterfly, with put your hands in the paint. And I couldn't put my hands in the paint because I thought I'd get in trouble when I get home for getting dirty. So it's all these things that I was carrying a lot of baggage. Anyway, when I went on to secondary school, had no qualifications. It was when you had CSEs, and I had one CSE, grade C, so that means I could go on. So I went on and wanted to do A-level art, and I just did this, and I remember this. I suppose this scarred me really. I did this amazing piece of work. It was a silk screen print, and it was this person going up and up like this. And after I'd done it, the work had to be moderated, so everybody's work was up. And then I remember my mum was with me, and then we went, and I'd been disqualified, and I was just like, I don't know why I've been disqualified. And then the lady said to my mum, because a child like her, living where she lives, could never produce that work. And I was yeah. And I was just like, what? And it goes, she's clearly copied it. There's no way she could have done that. And that kind of scarred me, because you're thinking I've worked really hard, and the artist that they're talking about, watch my time, I don't even know who this artist is. But it's you could never have done that. There's no way. So that was kind of my thing of art, and I thought, I'm never doing art. You could forget blunder, So that was it. And then my mum was a seamstress, and I'd always, I said I was in my bedroom knitting, making things. So I did knit, I did fashion, but I didn't know that knit was a medium that you could use in art. And that wasn't until much later when I saw Freddie Robbins had done knitted artwork that I thought, I could combine the knit and do that. And then I went to the Royal College of Art, where Richard was, which I hated. I had a different experience. I think you being as an overseas student, I think they treated you differently. I think, and you're a different campus than for me. I just find it very strange that I was moved to London, and then there was no black people. I saw 2 black people every day, so I found that really hard to deal with. And I'm a very shy. I don't speak out, so I had to. But anyway, as I would say to students, it doesn't matter if you have a bad experience. You can learn something from everything you do. So it was good to have that year to focus on my knitwear, my knitted art, and push the work on. So it's good. So we want this to be interactive, and this includes you as well. So if you've got any questions for us or comments or on this first half, I think.
Elaine, I was wondering why you had to be persuaded back to art. Like, what happened that pulled you away?
Good question.
Sorry.
Yes,
Have I gone through the
Well, it's my art, as you probably know or don't know. My art's quite political. I'm always thinking on a wider scale, of not so much personal, but what's going on in the world. And my first degree was in politics, political science, and then Italian studies. So I've always been interested in that side, and the art is always about that. And this country really disappointed me in the last, since 2016. I'm just about able to speak about it now. The rage that I felt. And also combined, you can hear it, it's visceral. But also when I was working really hard. When I graduated from Slade, I worked really solidly for about 13 years, 12 years. And I just pumped and pumped and pumped. Anything I could do, I did. And then by 2018, I finished a commission that I had, great commission, and then I did another art fair, and I was exhausted. So I thought, okay, I'll take a year out. And then I thought, and then the craziness. The pandemic came, and so I extended it a bit by bit, but all the time with this anger at this country that I didn't want any part of, and I didn't want any part of the art world, because you can imagine the combination. So so that was it. I would concentrate on myself, my house, my partner, and do that. So it's only with the persistence of she, the Lorna, that said, no, come on, let's give it a go. So I felt not just personally a good thing to do, but for collectively, it's a good thing to do for the community, but to show people that we're out here. So that's
I think I've got one actually, and for all of the artists. Like, how do you, each of you, I mean, maybe it'll be too long.
No, we've got time, but the people are being.
But how do you navigate the art world, right? Because I've been to like art school when I was older, and done the BA and that, came out and then found it really difficult. And I was just so unprepared for how to navigate that world. Because you've always got to have a side hustle to support yourself, and then how do you kind of keep your practice going? So I'm just interested to know how you work within that framework of the art world, maybe?
I suppose really for me, what I felt was that when I was doing my museum studies, I did my dissertation on how you get work into a gallery. Because I could see that there was a trick, a technique to it. And so that's really it. I started to realise, very much like Lorna, who kind of calls people out, it was confrontational. That, you contact, say, for example, the British Library, and say, how can I have my work on that wall? And you'd meet people, and you'd engage with people, how can I have my work in that collection? And then by confronting them, you'd get your work in the collection or get your family tapes digitised because you were being provocative. And then there'd be people who just didn't want to, who the functioner is, facilitate your thing, because I wanted to inculcate my work into society. So you actually need to know how to work with levers. And I don't think that black artists traditionally knew the people who held the levers. So that was it really. It's about having an understanding that you've just got to push your way in because you're not going to be welcomed in. I don't know if that answers, but it's how I do it.
Eugene, what about you? Because
I always had a studio, so throughout I suppose going back to the early story that I talked about, art was something making paintings really, because mostly painting, that I got a lot out of doing, so there was that. So I was at the studio, and then just listening to Paul, I was thinking, because Paul talked about confrontational and being quite assertive, which I'm not, so I've had a lot of help when I think about it from other black artists. For example, the Black Art Group. Eddie Chambers is really mover in that group. So I've just been mouldering on making art, but once that group started to emerge, they kind of did the work. That sort of, how do we as a group get into the museum? How do we get the show? So I was called into that group based on the work, really. So Paul's right. It is, and Lorna getting this show together proves that it's still important. That it shouldn't be, but to get something to happen takes a certain kind of character, and I think moving as a group, if you don't see yourself as personally having those characteristics, is probably the way to get on with it. Collectively.
What about you, Richard?
For me, it's a couple of things. One, mentors. Practicing at home in the Caribbean, and one of my mentors was Christopher Cozy, and if you ever look him up, he's like the thing in the Caribbean in terms of contemporary art. He's been connected to a lot of institutions and awards and stuff like that, and I've learned a lot from him. In a sense, he talked the MA into my head, put it this way, over all the discussions that we've had about how you navigate the art world and stuff like that. And then when I came here, it's obvious things like the networks that you would get with RCA, right? That was one of the reasons I chose RCA, because I wanted to increase my networks bigger than it was in the Caribbean. I got new networks there. One of the main things for me is that I've always worked as a graphic designer, so that I've never had the onus to have a selling career, in a sense. So it allows me to just make what I want, and I'm very own way that way. I just do what I want to do, and I don't shape myself to what a market wants or what a gallery expects or so. So for me, the real important thing is to make work that's true to you, and a certain amount of luck, I would say, combined with the networks, sort of gave me a trajectory that hasn't stopped really. In 2019, I was selected for some work that I made while I was at the RCA, called I Am Sugar, and I was selected, one of the pieces was selected to be in the Get Up stand-up show that Zach Ove and Kerry Ham curated. And from then, that work on its own kept moving and still keeps moving. So there's been that, but it just led from one place to another place to another place. I have a great mentor in Barbara Walker, who's a lovely artist and a lovely person. And she's the type of person who says, Richard, do this. Richard, don't do that. You need to do this. You need to make this happen. You need to get up off your ass and do this. You've slept enough during COVID. Get up. You know what I mean? So I had this person pushing me, and it's interesting because after saying to you, I don't really care what people think. I actually care what Barbara thinks. So when I get to that point where I feel like I don't want to do, I get up and I keep going because I know that phone is going to ring and she's going to say, so what you're working on? And I have to have something that I'm working on and a plan, you know. So she pushes in that direction and she's given me a lot of guidance. And through, you know, mutual friends that Eugene and I have in groups we've met in London, I've been guided in different ways. I've made lovely friends here, Lorna and my friend Shaman Watkins and Joyce Treasure, and just listening to how they navigate their careers has inspired me to look at different things. So the answer is that it's still ongoing, navigating. I don't think there's a point where it'll ever be, okay, so you've navigated it. And it's really hard to give advice on how to navigate the art career because every single person is different. What they do, what they make, how they make it, where they make it is different. So it's basically just have to get up and just go at it and just keep pushing and just keep pushing. And for me, it's more important to make work than hope that something is going to happen. So my primary focus is just making work. You know, that's my primary goal.
Yeah, but I mean, can I
Yeah,
to that? So, you know, the thing is though that, sorry, Rich is my husband, and I don't think it's a straight trajectory. You know, it's like this, You know, and that can be really hard and exhausting and demoralizing. You know, many more rejections than yeses, right? But he's just so focused and determined, you know, and I feel, and also he just keeps going back at it, you know, and I feel like that's really important for everybody, and Elaine, like, you just have to go back at it, because it's illogical. It's illogical. You know, if it were logical, we'd all be millionaires living in big houses. But at the same time, it's what you are driven to do, and I feel as though. But I also think that having people like Lorna who
Movers.
not just movers, but who demand more for her community, and not just on a one-time basis, but on an ongoing, unrelenting basis, is massively important. That you have your people who are there advocating for you, you know, and your presence.
Well, I think the collective is massively important in art. You know, I know so many artists that not so many, but I know have some artist friends. They work very solo, and it's kind of like a bit weird. And they really are entrenched in the art world. I think in a different way.
You've got a question, commercial. Karen, you've got a question.
Yeah, I do. So, none of you are young, sorry, but
Yeah,
it's
that's
true.
true.
I'm heartened. First of all, I want to thank you for all your stories. I'm fascinated by the higgledy-ness of most of them, and also drawing a line between how my life and my world is taking shape and that kind of, and how I'm showing up. I'm always interested in the fact that we often are reticent to talk about money. I love the phrase "kindness of strangers." I think that is so true in the sense that when you look back on your life, it's like, oh, that's like my art teacher was incredible and saw me, and I lived in a town where, you know, the next black person was my brother, you know, that kind of thing. But I'm interested. So there's that side. There's also the fact that young artists coming up, particularly young black artists, listening to this, when you're young, you think you know every bloody thing, don't you? And you would be forgiven for them thinking, yeah, but how? And I know you said you didn't want to give advice, but I'm particularly interested in the fact that we live in a capitalist society and we've got to pay our rent. How did you hold on to that belief that, like, do they have to wait 40 years, 30 years to kind of be more comfortable with what they're making and the space that they've created? Or, I guess I want to hear concrete encouragement as well about how you navigate this calling, if you like, and you're also a young person who's, not seen. It's kind of higgledy-piggledy.
I think, can I answer that?
Yeah, you go.
I think it's different now for young people, and one of the reasons I think one of the curse or a blessing is the internet. And I think that the way that news and information and connections that people are making, that they can make, that you couldn't make in isolation at college. When I was at Camberwell, I was quite isolated from the other students because I was so much older. And so they have their own sort of social friend groups that I didn't belong to. My friends tended to come from abroad, so I met people from Korea or from Japan. And similarly, when I went on to do my MA, most of my friends were from overseas. But the friendship groups among the young people were quite tight, and particularly if they did a BA together. But on the other side of it, where there weren't any black students, I was only one of two black students in the MA, in the MFA in the state. And the only reason I realised that was when somebody said, "Oh, do you want to come and see Victor's work?" And I said, "Who's Victor?" And then she looked a bit sheepish, my friend, she went, "It's the only other black person." And I, really? And because I was on campus in UCL, which is full of overseas students, I didn't realise that in my bit, there was only me and this other guy. So, but I do think for younger people, it's a bit easier. I'm not saying it's easy, but it is a bit easier. And I think since the pandemic and a little bit before, because of the internet, people are able to make those connections. And so you're seeing a lot of art that you wouldn't necessarily see and make connections with people you wouldn't necessarily meet around the world. So I think that they've been blessed by that. So yeah, that's what I'd say. It's different now, but from when we were younger, when you were the only one or one of the few.
What I would say is that things are different in as much as, so we're all older, so you know, for the black artists, the trajectory has been older, you know, it's like, you know, Elaine, Sonia, they waited so long. But, you know, traditionally you would need gallery representation, so you need the gallery to represent you, but now you have artists that are represented by record labels, so Skepta represents artists, so the model is different. You know, the main thing is you need to be making work. You can't sit down. It sounds like a silly thing to say, but you need to be making the work, because if there's no product, there's nothing to sell. So you need to be making the work. The work has to be seen. So they've got more opportunities to be seen, but that can be a downside as well, because it becomes a saturated market. So you could just think, I'm going to get my work on Instagram. So it's still this thing that it's still beneficial, because of the way the system is, to study art, to go and study art and to do those things and build your network. Because I would just say the network is the important thing, is how you build those networks. And unfortunately, it still can be where you studied. You know, so Stephen King was saying, like, it was going to the Royal College of Art that opened the door for him. I'm not saying that you have to do that, but you have to be aware of what the market is like and how things are. But art is not an easy thing, because most people don't make money, and it's this whole thing that people think these artists are making money. Most artists are not making money, and the ones that are making money are maybe painting dogs or being quite commercial. They're not necessarily doing the things that they want to do. So you have to separate what is it what you want to do. So for me, I make the art I want to make, but I'm not going to make money doing that. So for example, people go like, oh, you've made it now. So people see you in the show, you've arrived, and you'll have people like Kirsty will stop contacting me saying, I want to just diversify. I want you to come on and be a judge, okay? And I'm like, okay, so how much are you paying? Let's have a guess. Who wants to guess how much they're paying? So let me tell you the brief. Filming for 8 hours, you have to teach her a craft. How much?
100.
Zero.
Yeah.
100. It was £100. It's £100. So I said I wouldn't do it for £100.
It's exposure though, it's exposure.
But exposure kills. So the next year they came back, same question, and I was like, well, how much are you paying? And it was 150, and I was like, I just want to do it. But the thing is, there will always be people that are going to do it for the exposure. And so a friend of mine that had done it, who's quite a famous designer, and I said, why did you do it? And she goes, oh, I don't know, I just thought I should do it. And she said, they were living in Hastings, and said, they got a taxi, Kirsty got a taxi from London to pick her up in Hastings to take her to Devon. The taxi would cost more than what they're going to pay. So it's all these things. But you look at Jay Blake, that's how he got into telly, by doing that. So it depends what you want to do to get where you want to get, but I don't want to do that. So it's like, if you really want to stay true to yourself, you need a second job, basically. I don't know if anybody else wants to comment on it.
But having said that, and coming back to what Elaine has said about opportunities and the internet, right? One of the things that I find amazing is the world of the influencer. I was so skeptical about this influencer world, and I was like, this is ridiculous. Who really cares about that? And for me, the type of work I'm interested in is critically engaging work that actually tells a story or has something to do and makes a place. But then I realized that certain styles could actually earn a living as well, because I've seen people go from making critical work to doing very commercial, trendy pop work, and then aligning with brands, and you turn around twice and they're doing art and it's for a vodka or it's for a hotel chain or a car, whatever it is. And I don't knock any of that, because this person is actually earning a living, and the brands, so long as they pay the artist properly, the brands are benefiting from that link, and they're actually earning a living. So there are all these different things. And then one of the things that I realized coming here When I lived at home, I thought that the vision of being an artist was a certain thing. You were going to try to make work, and then you would probably get a gallery representation, you would probably be in some shows, and you would sell your work. And then I got here and I realized there are a lot of artists that come out of art school and they teach. They do workshops, they do community workshop, installers. I work with hospital rooms, and I have to tell you, right? The artists that I've met in hospital rooms who basically go into secure units and bring an artist's work to life. Because as an artist, you create work sometimes, but you see that how do you make this go from here into all of this kind of thing? They know how to do that, and it's amazing watching it, right? And it takes being an artist to have those skills and do those things. So there are all these different ways. So that's how you really say, how do you earn a living, and how there are all these different things.
True, because I lectured for years. That's the way that I support my. And I suppose my model is just knocking down doors. So, well, yeah, I mean, like, you know, when I went to school at the Crafts Council and did the knitted cover, the turquoise one, which they've acquired, but most people wouldn't have acquired it if I hadn't knocked down the door.
Yeah.
But anyway, we're going to have a break now. You're going to have a comfort break.
Can I just say one piece of advice that was given by Grayson Perry is two things. One, people say to him, "Oh, your stuff is really expensive." And he says, "Well, why didn't you buy me when I was cheap?"
Yeah. That's
number one. Number two, he said, which I want to stay on the bus. Doesn't matter. All the opportunities come in, take them. I should take that advice myself. So I'm just saying, but he said stay on the bus because that bus is going to go where you want to go. But if you get off, you won't get there. So,
did you want to add anything?
Well, I mean, it's fascinating hearing, and it's a big conversation, but what I'd like to put also on the table in terms of negotiating is to not underestimate the kind of institutionalized racism and the sexism that keeps women
and ageism.
Well, that too, but you know, if you just take a very cold look at who are in museums and galleries, and you know, the amount of women versus men, is one thing, and then all the stuff around race and institutionalized, and that we internalize all of that. So we've got the life of the artist, which touches everybody, but you're also carrying the internalized sexism that says, well, actually, perhaps you shouldn't be here and you don't belong here. And then the racism, the internalized racism that makes you doubt your own value. And I think, you know, for younger people to be aware that this stuff is carrying on as well and to keep on the path is really crucial.
Oh yeah, and I think class is part of that.
Class is a huge part of that. You know, that message always that this isn't for you, you shouldn't be here, is enormous.
The
And we internalise
syndrome.
But can I also ask about this one? I don't know if it pertains in the art world. I suspect it does, just like the film world. It's a small world, and there are a few gatekeepers and lots of people trying to get through those gates. And don't burn any bridges, you know, and also don't assume the opportunities will come. You have to just work, like Lorna said, you have to work and work and work. And you have to be actively seeking out those opportunities. They don't just fall into your lap.
I agree with you, but all I'm saying is that that's exhausting. One of the things about being here and dealing with that, it's exhausting for all artists, and it's exhausting for all female artists. And then there's this other thing going on, and you know, you get to a point where you just, I mean, when you say how do you negotiate, there's not a year when I think, I'm giving this up, because I'm just exhausted of it, and what that does to you. It's not to be underestimated.
Did you want to say something, Jude?
Your point of not burning any bridges, sometimes we don't know the bridges being burnt because of the obstacles that will be put in the way.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, God knows, I've been to a jillion bridges. I'm the last person to talk about that. Right, but I mean, I'm just saying that, you know, as a filmmaker, you know, we have people who get opportunities and then kind of poo on everybody around them and then don't follow through, and you know, so there are things that as creative people we are maybe less aware of needing to follow through on, I think, and there's a level of professionalism I think that's required to sustain a career in art, and just kind of showing up. And yes, Maggie is absolutely unrelenting. But also, like Richard said, do you mind if I say this?
You were.
So after the whole George Floyd thing happened, Richard said it's Find a Black Friend Week. And it's become Find a Black Friend Year and Find a Black Friend 2 years. Let's face it, this exhibition is happening now because of that. And so it's to understand the moment and just say, you know what, to answer that, even if this moment, the only way to get this moment to last is to actively engage with it and to say, you know what, I'm grabbing everything that I can get, and I'm going to push to extend this moment. And I feel as though,
Can I just bring Becky in? Yeah.
Hi, thanks. Hello.
Hi, Becky.
Hi, Richard. Hi. Yeah, just I thought it was really lovely just to come back round, because Maggie's kindness of strangers, what I have sort of experienced that as today is really like the beauty of our teachers and educators, and whether it was the old lady next door who said there's a club, you know, she might be a stranger, she might be covered, but that was like a moment of like an educational moment. And then also everybody spoke about the teacher in junior school, middle school, you know, and then this is also like historical decades going back, you know, and right now back, you know, to early decades, because intergenerational like group here, like that we, you know, and I just thought, isn't, you know, it's so important just to acknowledge that. It just takes one person to like that educational moment, and also something that I've got very interested in the last 2 years since receiving a late autism diagnosis at 45, now 47, is for some of us, we can't just show up and knock on doors for ourselves, because it's way too dangerous. For intersectional regions that Maggie's spoken about, which I would add then neurodiversity, neuroqueer presentation, all of those, it's way too dangerous. And with my moving from like the great like forest of not really knowing or understanding into being able to start to like work out and then start to understand things a bit more at an information level, is actually having a bit more information about how to approach certain situations depending on your own intersections. So for me, I need to learn a bit more, and I generally need to have an advocate who's going to show up with me or for me, you know. And so actually getting to understand our individual selves, and then collecting some information and guidelines. There's no guidelines for lots of things actually, so I'm hoping to write some, you know, write some, and you know, if there's someone who can knock on a door for you, then that, you know, work out that how to like share the skills. But you know, from with like my own, for example, neuro difference to lots of people, actually understanding that that's a really good point. It's not safe just to show up now, and at mid-career as well. It's also very high stakes political, which is
a really good point. Right, we're on time, so you've got a 15-minute comfort break. So back here, please. So this is the second half. I hope you've enjoyed the first half and you found it stimulating and interesting. So this second half, what we're going to look at is what are the themes that each artist has chosen for the We Out Here exhibition and why. Is that themes that spread over We Out Here in their work generally? So these themes, recurring themes that you work with or not. So I think we'll start at the other end this time, start with Paul.
Right, yeah, themes, it's a straightforward one for me.
Oh, hold on.
I turned it over in my mind. I had already been going. Yeah. it's there. Right. For me, the theme, it's really been the description of the slave ship, which is 1789 sort of broadside, which is all the slaves on the slave deck. And that has really, I went on a trip on a ship to the West Indies, to the Amazon, and it was a return to various places. And I was right in the basement of a very big ship. I'd never been on a cruise before in the base. And to find my way back to my own cabin, you had this sort of schematic of where all the cabins were. And it just, for some reason, made me suddenly realise that that wasn't the slave ship. I was on the ship, I was going to the West Indies, and it just struck me. And so I've just always been fascinated by that, and I researched it, the description of the slave ship, got it enlarged, I kind of did all sorts of things, and I've done works of art with it before, and I know that lots of people are fascinated with it. It's made into sort of materials. And so for me, when Lorna wanted me to do something for the show, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do, but I just knew that I hadn't finished with the tokens of that. So I kind of selected 2 or 3 of the tokens and got them made into engineering sort of stamps, and then they became kind of icons that I could use. And earlier works I have used other tokens, so I'm kind of into tokens, stamps, images, and extrapolating through that way. And for me, I think it's, each time I've finished the job, I think it's over, because for me these things live with me. And when I kind of start to work, I just think, wow, and you keep working, and I think it might be this time over. So that's it for me. It's about tokens, images, precision, stitching, and that's what I'm interested in, really, how you can kind of use your art to convey to people an understanding of what matters to you.
Can I just say what about, because the work's called From, and this seems to be a theme that you're looking at.
Yeah, oh yeah, but that's sort of slightly, in a way, the work I did has sort of fish references and it's all of that, but it was going to be a piece that I wanted to call Save Our Souls, because of the fact that slaves weren't kind of baptised, and they weren't people, so they were objects. And then what happened was because of the furore with Ngozi Fulani and the Queen's Party, and Lady Hussey asked me how many times did she come from, I suddenly thought that what I really wanted to do was to address the issue of from, where you come from. So that's what the work changed in its name. And other works that I had were going to be other things but change names, but it just didn't change. And a point that people are making, and for me it's a real point, is with the murder of George Floyd, what you had was an inflection point. And people say to me, so what happened after that death? What did it actually mean? And the people have talked about it. What it means that as an artist, as a person, as a black person, you have an extra millisecond to make your case. And in that millisecond, so many things are changing. And our work is actually, it's just, like a photo finish, we're now at that point. That millisecond makes a difference. So that, and I was saying that it's not in the work I've written, but it's what I've learned from meeting people, is that now this millisecond means that we're looking at, where objects come from, where the Benning bronzes go back, where the Parthenon marbles go back, whether, somebody from the BBC or Australians wants to monitor about the history of slavery. You've had the 100 shares given by Colston to the William III, and the actual ideas of everybody wanting to know the origins of the national trust. So whereas people are always asking me where I come from, now people are querying where objects come from, where money comes from. And I think this all comes from the fact that we've got that extra millisecond from people being prepared to listen more to what stories we've got to tell because of George Floyd. No, I still have 20 seconds.
You haven't.
I hope you couldn't see.
I can see it, my eyes are sharp. There's really still in it.
Oh, I didn't know if you wanted to stand it
When you're ready, Maggie.
Themes. Well, my work, I work in series always, and so this is probably the 3rd series of work, because I find that using my work and my activism together has been the way forward for me. And so something drives me nuts. That's my signal. I'll read something and just think, I can't believe this, and it'll carry on until it becomes a series of work. And so the last one, 5 Times More, was you know, 3 years in the making because I make felt. It's quite a slow process, and I will often do sort of 8 or 10 images, pieces in a series. So I've now started, I use this opportunity to start a new series, because again, it's one of those things of kind of that feeling, and what can I do about it? And of course, you know, the climate emergency and racial justice are just so, well, they're in all our faces, but as a visual artist, and as a black visual artist, what can I usefully say about it? And that's always my starting point, because at this point in my life, I suppose, I'm just interested in change. You know, what can I do? What scope do I have? What platform do I have at this point in my life to try and instigate, inspire change? That's the bottom line. And so all the work I make has that as a background thought. And it's hard work, because I'm longing for the day I might just get up and think, I think I'll just do flowers today. But it's not evident. So the theme of this work, and it's that something I've been thinking about and I'm involved with groups about, is because of my textile background with fast fashion and textiles. And I just find it unbearable to see what's happening to them. Also, I have a deep connection with Uganda, so I started a charity there 15 years ago. I ran that for 10 years, so I was backwards and forwards to East Africa, so I've seen firsthand what that means. So the theme is really, the focus is figuring out what can I say, how can I say it, so that people go, okay, and something happens. So this is the first, because it was a great opportunity to have this large space to make a large statement, but attached to that are very many aspects of this whole climate emergency, particularly around waste and particularly around this relationship with global north, global south. And I think what's interesting as a black artist now is for me to figure out where I am in that too, because I live in the global north. Although I'm global majority, I live in the global north. So how do I negotiate that and navigate that in a useful way? Of course, I can sit and look at my belly button and tell you, oh, it's really hard to do it. But actually, you know, there's stuff to be said and done. So the next piece in this series is going to look more closely at the recycling element, because I've just been so shocked at what happens when we, in the best in good faith, put our things in these machines or in these big containers, you know, and been discovering what actually happens to them and how much still is ending up in landfill, and that it's such a big business. It's an enormous business. So how do you, what can you usefully do within a capitalist structure? You know, within a capitalist structure, to change this, because it's big business. And yep, it's finished.
Okay, I'm going to just read part of this, 2 pages, and it's really just to give context, background to my practice. The specifics of the work on show, I think, will probably be talked about during the exhibition tours, but it's just context here. Right, so I'm going to stand up to this, but I'll sit down.
Stand up for the camera.
In his essay, Cultural Identity and Diaspora, Stuart Hall reinvigorates the language with which we make sense of painting as a practice that can convey ideas about cultural identity and representation in a way that is embedded in the process itself. He proposes 2 ways to think about cultural identity and representation. The first is in terms of shared culture, collective histories and narratives. In the second sense, he proposes a more contemporary explanation of identity as becoming, as well as being, where the process of making by hand, transforming over time the blank canvas from nothing to something, speaks of this becoming something, being. This reading of identity belongs to the future as much as to the past. It invites an imaginative process whereby issues of identity and representation can be tested through visual art practice, painting in this case, by engaging with painting's inherent processes which endlessly surface on its own terms during the act of making. I'm interested in this discursive position, where notions of identity and representation do not close out painting's historical narratives, tasked as it is with serving contemporary discussions about representation and identity or other issues of the day. I'm as interested in its histories, its controversies of status, its narrative persistence, as I am to engage with the processes essential to forming each object and each creative outcome. I'm interested in finding ways through painting to explore Black British diaspora, based on my own experiences. I'm interested in the unique position I hold as an art practitioner embedded in European culture while remaining symbolically outside of it due to the colour of my skin. Painting is a practice that can convey ideas about identity and representation, but the tasking of painting should never undersell the subject of painting itself and all its processes. To task painting in this way is to put it to the surface of ideas about identity, representation, or other investigative ambitions, is to risk closing out its own historical narratives. I'm as interested in its history, its controversy. I think I've read that already. I'm interested in the interplay of constituent materials that form the work: the paint, its malleability, the mark with its potential velocities, colour and light, articulation, the trace of the hand, gesture, how it reveals itself in the action of becoming, conjure meaning out of material. In his essay, Painting Out of Reticence, Foil 2000, Michael Phillipson writes about this incidence of material and at the painting's surface. That is, that which is beyond the surface can only be envisioned by just the surface in all of its elusive peculiarities. He foregrounds painting's materiality here by drawing our attention to the substance of painting, its body, its medium. But he's also inviting the reader to consider what else is contained there, its elusive peculiarity, the trace of the hand, the gesture, the evocation of painting's temporal properties, its persistence, recalling of its making across time. In my ongoing project as a painter, I want to acknowledge that social and political landscape of our times call for the relationship between art, painting in this instance, and its audiences to be reassessed, a rethinking of what artists do and make, the terms by which artists operate, to bring meaningful understanding to art and the artist's role in society. I aim to continue my investigation into the potentialities for painting, while concurrently exploring the ways that painting operates in the public sphere, for whom, in what form, and by what means, and to what arguments it can critically contribute. To succeed or fail, the success or failure of the work as a body depends on how deftly issues of race representation can be explored while resisting didacticism, the closing out of readings.
I've given my 3 minutes to use them. Come on. The themes of my work, thank you. I was really interested in what you were saying about the illusions and the symbols. Well, because I'm a sculptor primarily, but I'm an artist whose tendency to practice is sculpture, 3D, and I also am a printmaker. And the themes of my work are always sort of reactions to something that I've read or heard that, like Maggie, make me annoyed. So it's a way of channeling that energy, and channeling that anger, or channeling that frustration. So the themes in this work, as you may or may not know, CO27 Blue Tears is about cobalt, the cobalt mining of the DRC. And even though it's so far away, and you know, I've never actually been to the DRC. The history of the DRC, the ongoing exploitation, is a really good example of what colonialism has done to the world, and predatory capitalism, and particularly predatory racist capitalism. Because without racism, capitalism doesn't exist. It has no function. It cannot function. It needs to create that other, and we are that other. And so, and you can, every time you look at a different example of it, I think the DRC represents an example of it. You can't ignore it. So I thought, how can I visually make that story come to life? You know, so I was looking at the materials, and so that's why I've used copper, because I love working with copper. But again, that was a learning where the copper actually comes from. It usually comes from where poor people live, and where poor people have to mine it. So it's usually the underclass that provide us with this cheap material. And similarly, cobalt, which now has gone exponentially from there to there because of our mobile phones and because the West needs good green energy. So we greenwash on this side at the expense of the blackwashing in what they call a third world country. The DRC should be like the richest country in the world. It has everything there. It's like, it's as if to say, well, what can we have that will, you know, that we need? They've got it, but somehow it's been extracted over the last 500 years. You know, so that's what the theme is in CO27. So I get really het up when I think I've got to calm down when I talk about it. The other work is obvious about Africa. And I put the glass piece in the middle, which represents the DRC. And in that work, I wanted it to be much lighter because of the what's the word? When the reputation of Africa is A as a country and B as a corrupt place and everything bad happens there. And I wanted to celebrate Africa. I wanted to make something that was beautiful that represented Africa. When you look at it, you're seeing something completely, a different representation of how Africa is perceived. And that's why I made it in this delicate paper, tissue paper, with this fragmented glass, which is actually quite beautiful and catches the light. So I wanted to make, in both cases, I wanted to marry different materials that you wouldn't ordinarily associate, by tissue paper and broken glass, two things you would normally put together. So that's what the theme is, to make both works stand out, but they're really talking about difficult things, difficult subjects. Thank you.
Okay, well, some of what Eugene said, especially around Paul and the ideas of identity, because that's where my work is actually rooted. In 2014, when I was 40, I think, I created a work called Finding Black. The work had 90 pieces in it, including sculpture, film, drawings, and prints. And it became a seminal thing for me and my practice, because basically it was what the title says. It was called Finding Black. And when you come from a post-colonial environment, you find that your life is shaped in certain ways. So we were a British colony, which meant that I went to school and I learned to read from a book called Nelson West Indian Readers, right? So I've done all the poems that English children do in school. I know about snow. I know about the Sans Odi and a little girl that almost drowned when the tide came in and stuff like that. And I know about the fact that, you know, in Flanders Field, the poppies grow besides these, so there's row and row and stuff like that, right? But here I am in an island being shaped by these things on one hand, and also being shaped in the media by American, I would say, cultural imperialism, movies and television and cartoons and comics and stuff like that. And what I wanted to do was to find the me in all of those things that basically showed me who I am. And that discussion led me here. One reason to come to school, but also made me try to connect the dots between the Caribbean and being a member of a diaspora, according to Stuart Hall. And my work in a nutshell really is my deep dive into my own identity, what it means for me, what it means for me in the present, what it means for me in the past, what it's going to mean for me in the future. And all of my works are interconnected and they work back and front, you know, like that. The drawing out there actually shows that in a sense, because it connects different time periods and different frames in a strange way, because it's almost as if ideas could actually talk to one another. What would the ideas actually have to say? And that's how my brain works, and I think that's how all brains work, because we don't do things in a linear fashion. We think about lots of things at once. Some shift to the left, some shift to the right, some go to the back, some come to the front. And the theme of my work basically inculcates all the things that surround my deep dive into Black identity, which would be history, colonial history, the history of the Caribbean, works by Caribbean intellectuals like Stuart Hall and C.L.R. James, Eric Williams, Rural Capitalism and Slavery, Campbell Braffett. And the thing for me is I feel a resonance with these figures and these names, and of course people like Darcus Howe, because they were young men in a Caribbean and in Britain at a certain time that was in transition. They were young men making their way and finding themselves and finding their identity in a pre-independence Caribbean, and then they came to Britain and they did quite well in Britain and they contributed to Britain, and they were sort of closing off a triangle, and in a sense it's the thing that I try to emulate in my work in terms of what I'm doing.
So themes, I don't really have themes. I suppose I do have some themes in my work, but like Maggie and Elaine, I'm more reacting to things. So my work is always social commentary. So a lot of my work, I might just something that makes me angry. I think something needs to be said about this, and I need to be the one to do it. And there doesn't need to be a show. I'm just going to make the work. So, for example, I remember when there was no pink bags, recycling bags, and the council wouldn't leave any, and I knitted a bag, and I put a thing on it, we need more bags, and I hung it outside, and I did a whole social media campaign about it. And also I did, I watched the Archers, I listened to the Archers radio programme. I was brought up, my parents worked a lot, so I was brought up by a white nanny, so I sort of had a lot of that culture. And there were just themes in the programme, so it was about domestic violence, and I thought, I need to make a piece about this, and I need to put it out in the street where people could see it. You know, so I did a whole series on that, and then the BBC would contact me, would you like to respond to the storyline? So, in a sense, when we're talking about work, you can create work for yourself just by doing what you're doing. But in this particular show, the theme is the hidden histories of Black makers. So, it was said to me by an academic, a knitting academic, there is such a thing. I was at a knitting conference, and I was knitting, and I said, oh, you know, the crowd's not very diverse. I said, that's because Black people don't knit. Only crochet. While I'm knitting. I just thought, okay, while I was at the RCA, I need to do my dissertation about this and unpack it. And then when I started to unpack it, I thought, she's right. Because if you look in the books on the history of knitting, we're not there. It was saying in the beginning, knitting started in Egypt. It's one sentence. In Europe, and the rest of the book is on there. So it's like, what are our histories? So I did a whole seminal dissertation on the myth that Black people don't knit, and it's been quoted in a lot of books, which is good. So when the turquoise cover, and this is again by arguing or calling out the Crafts Council, then Dr. Karen Patel was writing about how do we tackle racism in craft, did a commission. So I was one of the commission artists, but that only came about because I was very vocal. So it was just like, you need to make a piece that speaks to that. And I was thinking, how do I do that? And I thought, a magazine cover would be the ideal way to do that. So that's how the magazine cover came about. So I did that one. And then the second one, because this year will be 75 years of Windrush, was going to that theme. So a lot of my work is just reacting to what things are happening. See, I did the So do you have any questions for this section or comments? Yes, you've got, is that your hand or you just like...
No, I'm just
Or do any of the artists have any questions for anybody else?
Anybody else in the audience?
No, we don't often get the opportunity to ask each other questions. You don't have to.
I've got a question.
Yeah.
Because I think it's probably, certainly in the English experience, the UK experience, it's quite rare to have 6 black artists in a room as a panel. So I want to ask a potentially divisive question. I'm Jewish, and there's an old Jewish saying that if you put 2 Jews in a room, you have 3 opinions immediately. And so I wondered how, in your work, in position to the black artist, what are the problems of that in terms of monolithic images of black artists?
I think that room shows you. I think that room answers your question. Because all the work is very different. You know, from in terms of your painting, craft, sculpture, installation. I mean, Maggie's work is tremendous. The skill that's in that, the vision that's in that, and then when you can see it from a distance, but when you go up close, you're pulled in because there's even more skill there. It's just and I think each of us have shown what we can do. So there's not this collective black as people like to assume. Because I remember when I was at work back in the day, something would happen, and so what do you think the black community thinks about it? And what does the black community say? And how am I supposed to speak for the black community? But when something happens, you do become this homogenous entity. But I think the work in that room speaks to our individuality, but our proximity because of our shared history, but also the fact we live here in Hastings, and Lorna's had the insight to draw us together so we can show that. So anyone walks into that room, they see the wealth of different skills and vision and ability. I think that answers your question.
What I would say is, so I've got 2 magazine covers which are very graphical. Then I've got the Women Blue piece, if you have seen it, which is more abstract. And why? Well, that is my favourite piece that I've made today. Right? But I like it also because when people see the graphical work with the black person, it's kind of like the black art, and we can be positioned like that. That needs to be a black image in it, or it has to be identified as, So like when they did, they had to show me, what was it, Artist Support Pledge, and then they felt it wasn't quite diverse, and then they asked me to put a piece of work in. It's like, what have I got at home? But it's like, but how is it not diverse? What do you want me to put in that will make it look more diverse? So often it has to be that black figure. We could just do roses and it will be diverse. So that's to your point. So a lot of the time we can be pigeonholed into that we have to make certain work to make it to seem diverse. They want to walk around and go, oh yes, it's diverse. You shouldn't be able to tell whether the work is diverse by looking at the work. Comments on that? There's a question for you.
Well, it kind of followed on really because that the social commentary comes over really strongly in all your work in different ways. Have you ever, could you imagine ever, or actually is it not, just making a piece where that wasn't there? Or is there a pressure that there is so much to comment on that there has to be commentary in there? Or actually is it just because you're a human and commenting on the human condition needs commenting on? But I didn't know if you did it, how consciously you do it, or actually is it just part of that creative process, and is there an extra pressure to comment because there's so much?
Richard then
for me, I just make work. And my father had a saying, right? He used to say that if someone asks you something, don't waste your words. And my attitude to everything that I do is when I have opportunities, I don't waste opportunities. So it's the way I make art. And I don't like using the term art for art's sake or anything like that, because that's not the discussion that I'm having. But my point of reference is how I think and the things that I think about, and that's why I make the work that I make. So I don't know about just making something for making something's sake or trying to purposely make something that's beautiful or not. Even when I did that cheekily a couple of years ago, I basically created a series of works that were quite serious about a serious topic, but I purposely made it very pretty to suck the audience in. Because there's only one way for me to make work. I'm interested in work that engages. I'm interested in critically engaging work, to put it another way. I was also trained as a graphic designer, so I'm accustomed to communicating A to Z in the shortest time possible for the widest audience. So for me, it's just a no-brainer. I just make the work I make. It's not a burden. It's just what I do.
Maggie's next. Maggie's next, then Eugene. Let's get some order.
Right. Do we have the time? Yeah, just to respond to that, because I think it's so interesting what racism does, really, that I can wake up in the morning and just be thinking about anything at all. And I can go to, let's go to London to a posh, Selfridges is always the one that comes to mind, but I can walk around there thinking about oranges or anything. But how I'm perceived, unless I'm dressed correctly, is a possible shoplifter. You get the security guard following you. So in a sense, I don't have that freedom, that choice, because regardless of what I'm thinking about, it's going to be interpreted. So if I do flowers, it's like, well, is this the black experience of flowers? So the gift is also a burden, and I think, how do you negotiate that is always the challenge. Do you kind of go for it? I've decided, okay, if that's what you want me to talk about, guess what, I'm going to really talk about it. But there are other ways to approach it. But I think we don't have a choice, and I think that's very specific around racism and also around sexism, because you're confronted with it whether you like it or not. And I think for myself anyway, it's an ongoing negotiation, and it's well, as I mentioned before, I'm longing for the day that we're just in an exhibition. You're not looking at where's the diversity, is this a black, is this a woman, that you have that freedom, but we're just not there yet. Yeah.
Eugene.
Yeah, I agree with everything Maggie said. I came out of art school making abstract paintings, and all the way through art school, the work that I presented was abstract. I always made figurative work, but that's just like something, it's a very strange relation between the abstract work that I made and figurative work. But all the abstract work I made wasn't truly modernist, in the sense that for me there were always narratives behind them, and the narratives came from my experience of the weather in Jamaica, the storms. The scale of the paintings were really determined by the scale of the subject, but it was always to do with who I am, and part of what I am is black. So it's interesting, as Maggie said. So that's always present. When I started to make figurative work, that was partly to do with not make it, because I always made it when I forefronted the figurative work. Well, that in a way, I was just trying to make that blackness evident. So it was a case of just bringing all of who I was to the fore, because I think it's something I have to negotiate all the time in real life. So it seemed important to start to deal with it. But like Maggie, I think that question that you asked is not answerable. It's partly something that you contend with all the time in terms of subject matter, in terms of your own response to the work you've made, response to the audience, and so on. That's what I want to say about it.
Just to add to what we were talking about before, right? The thing that I actually do find difficult is when I have to do a workshop, and it's a skills-based workshop. If I'm doing a skills-based workshop, and let's say it's for an institution, a couple of different people come and we're doing, and it's landscape painting. Fine, I can do that, I can paint, but it's boring. For me, the enjoyment comes from seeing how the people in the workshop interact with what I'm teaching and doing. I've done it with collage workshop. I created a collage workshop, and I used a carnival character so that it would be really interesting to me. And it was really interesting to the audience, and the audience really fed off of it. But for me, it's because basically it's a skills-based workshop. It's not actually, and that is actually harder than doing my regular work, because I'm just plugged in a totally different way. I'm not connected to any source material or anything like that. I'm just basically teaching the skill and allowing you the opportunity to create something yourself.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question. I'm not sure that I'm going to be in the same area as has been said. So, for example, we kind of talked every week on Zoom. So there's a kind of a resonance that builds up between us. So it would be, and it's like if you're, and I'm a very bad golfer, but you get to a certain point and you just know that you're going to have to use a sand wedge. And we were all at the same point, and so we all picked up the same club. And we're living at a time when certain things are happening. We understood that we were working here in this gallery, and it was against the grain of what we were doing. So I think there was a kind of a sense that we all knew that we couldn't do flowers. But it's just that kind of resonance that because of the meetings regularly, the talking regularly, you kind of realised, I think, what was the right sort of approach to this situation. So of course I make things that are amusing, I like things being really fun, but it just kind of didn't feel right for that. The George Floyd situation, the things that are happening, the people coming over here in boats, it just didn't seem right that this was an opportunity to be frivolous.
I have a question directly for Lorna. Lorna, I've known your work forever, and I was really interested to hear you say that non-figurative, non-narrative, well there is a narrative to it, but it's a non-figurative piece, and no text in it has been your favourite thing. Does that mean that you're moving away?
Yeah, I think so. I think I'm moving away.
Have you had enough telling stories?
It's still telling stories in different ways.
In a kind of...
Yeah, and it's like where people put so much on you to keep having that graphical style that it's just like, it comes a box, and I just don't want to be contained. And doing that piece and responding to music was just be able to work in a different way. And I think also from a point of medium, why can't Nick just be like graphic, abstract art? You just look at it and you think, oh yeah, I like that. So to move more that way, so I think I will be moving more in that direction. I think when I was at Royal College of Art, I felt like you kind of, to your point, it was more like, well, what are you doing? Like, it's like to show who you are. So it's like I feel a freedom, and I think also what I would say, the last few years, pandemic, it's been exhausting, and I think particularly for black people, it's been so draining because it has been this find the black friend. I've never had so many offers of commission. Do you know what I mean? And it's draining, and it's like where they just think you're going to be super productive. It's like we're just running, we're just grieving. So it's like I've come out of that now, and it's like, oh, what am I going to do now? And so I think there's a whole new thing to explore. So there's that freedom to do it, and also there's a freedom that comes by, I suppose, being acknowledged. So you get freedom to do more work that you want to do, whereas before most people would be more contained. Right, well, we've done the time really well, and I thank you all for coming. Oh, sorry? Okay, I thank you all for coming, but the time is 3 minutes to 4.
Oh, I've got 3 minutes.
But what I'm going to say, because there's important things that need to be said. So you might not be aware, but when we got offered the show here, and very nicely, Hastings Contemporary made a space in their programme for us. And there was a space, and there's 6 artists, and there's £1,500, which is not enough for us to do the show. So we had to raise money, and we got our money from the Arts Council. And the way that the Arts Council works, it's about data, and it's about metrics. So what would be really helpful for us, there's 2 QR codes at the back. You can scan it, and there's evaluation form. You can do it, and it takes a few minutes. And I built in time into the programme. You can do that.